The night air was heavy with humidity, the kind that clung to skin and made every breath feel like a burden. Street lamps buzzed and flickered over cracked sidewalks, painting weak halos of light onto the pavement. Marcus Hale walked calmly through the neighborhood, his steps measured, his posture straight, his face unreadable. To anyone watching, he looked like just another man trying to make it home after a long day. But beneath the calm exterior lived something sharper, something unyielding. The blue and red glare of police lights painted the corner ahead, and the low growl of voices carried down the block. Marcus slowed his pace. He had seen scenes like this before, far too many, in fact. He could already hear the aggressive tone, the subtle slurs disguised as law enforcement procedure. A young kid, barely in his 20s, stood pressed against the hood of a car, hands trembling, his face pale under the flashing lights. 3 officers circled him like wolves, mocking and threatening. "Where you headed this late?" one of them sneered, shoving the boy's shoulder. I was just going home," he stammered. His backpack lay on the curb, its contents spilled, books, papers, and a half-eaten sandwich. Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't move yet. He watched. The officers weren't after crime. They were after control. They laughed as the boy tried to explain, demanding identification, accusing him of things that made no sense. Loitering, trespassing, suspected theft. None of it had any weight. It was intimidation, plain and simple. Marcus had seen this game before. He knew its rules better than the men playing it. Finally, the sergeant with sergeant's stripes noticed Marcus standing there, silent but steady. "You got a problem, buddy?" he barked, hand inching toward his belt. Marcus stepped forward slowly, the air thickening with every stride. "The only problem," he said evenly, "is the abuse of authority I'm looking at right now." The officers snorted. "Oh, we've got ourselves a hero!" One of them took a step closer, sizing Marcus up. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with years of training carved into his frame. Yet Marcus didn't flinch. His eyes were calm, piercing, like a man weighing the truth against arrogance. "Who the hell do you think you are?" the sergeant demanded, lips curling into a smirk. Marcus let the silence hang just long enough. His voice, when it came, was measured, deep and steady. "I'm a lawyer, and I know the law better than any of you standing here." The words landed like thunder. The laughter died. The kid against the car turned his head in shock. The officers' expressions shifted in unison, from arrogance to unease, from mockery to caution. Marcus stepped closer, his voice still quiet, but carrying the weight of authority they could not match. "I know the Fourth Amendment. I know the standards of reasonable suspicion. I know unlawful detainment when I see it. And right now, what you're doing will crumble in court before it even makes it past the first page of my report." The sergeant's jaw worked. He wasn't used to being challenged, not like this, not by someone who could dismantle his entire stance with words instead of fists. "Sir," one officer muttered, trying to regain control, "you need to step back. No, what you need to do is release that young man, because unless you want your names and badge numbers filed in a civil rights lawsuit by morning, you're already standing on the wrong side of the line." The boy's eyes widened. Hope flickered in them, fragile but growing. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. "Who do you work for?" the sergeant finally asked, his voice not quite as steady. Marcus pulled a slim leather case from his pocket, flipped it open, and held it under the streetlight. The embossed seal glistened. Federal Defense Attorney. And before you think about lying, every word of this interaction has been recorded. I don't bluff, not with the law. The sergeant's face paled. The younger officers shifted, their bravado crumbling. What had been an easy night of power games suddenly became a nightmare with career-ending consequences. "You think you can walk around here flaunting?" the sergeant began, but Marcus didn't let him finish. "Not flaunting, protecting," Marcus said firmly. "Protecting the rights you swore to uphold but chose to trample. This young man deserves dignity. He deserves freedom. And tonight he has both, because I'm not letting you write his life story with your intimidation." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Slowly, with reluctance carved into every movement, the sergeant stepped back. He gestured to his men. "Let him go." The boy straightened, his knees shaky. His backpack lay at his feet, his belongings scattered like his faith in justice. Marcus bent down, gathered the books, the papers, and handed them back to him. Their eyes met, and no words were needed. Gratitude lived in his trembling smile. Marcus turned back to the officers, his gaze steady, unwavering. "You tried to mock. You tried to intimidate. But knowledge cuts deeper than any weapon you carry. Remember that, the next time you think power is yours to abuse." The officers said nothing. They climbed back into their cruiser, their faces pale, their silence heavy. The lights faded into the night as the car pulled away. Marcus stood there a moment longer, the boy beside him clutching his backpack like a lifeline. The street was quiet again, but the weight of what had happened lingered. "Thank you," he whispered finally. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "Never thank me for doing what's right. Just remember, knowledge is the one weapon they can't strip from you. Learn it. Live it. One day, you'll stand where I stand." The boy nodded, his eyes burning with new fire, and together they walked down the dim street, leaving behind the shadows of fear and the echo of justice spoken aloud. But Marcus knew this was only one battle. There were more, darker, heavier, waiting just beyond the horizon. And the men who tried to intimidate him tonight, they would not forget. No, they would come again, desperate to protect the crumbling walls of their power. And when they did, Marcus would be ready. Because the law was not just words to him. It was his weapon, his shield, his revenge. The quiet didn't last. It never did. Marcus Hale had been practicing law long enough to know that men who abused power didn't stop after one confrontation. No, they stewed, they festered, they plotted. The 3 cops he'd faced that night, especially Sergeant Cole, the one with the stripes and the ego, would not forget how their authority had been stripped bare under the dim glow of a street lamp, and they would not forgive him for it. The first sign came a week later. Marcus was walking out of the courthouse, briefcase in hand, when he spotted Cole leaning against a patrol car across the street, arms folded, staring at him. No words, no actions, just a look that promised trouble. Marcus didn't flinch. He met the stare, nodded once, and walked on. But he felt the heat of those eyes burning into his back long after he'd turned the corner. Then came the calls. Late at night, his phone would ring, and when he answered, silence filled the line. Sometimes there was faint laughter, other times the sound of a police scanner. He logged each one, documenting everything. A lawyer's mind was a fortress of evidence, and Marcus built his case brick by brick. The retaliation escalated. His car was pulled over twice in 1 week for faulty taillights that weren't faulty. He was followed home more than once by squad cars that lingered just long enough to remind them they were there. They wanted him afraid. They wanted him to break. But Marcus Hale had lived his life being underestimated. He had been mocked in classrooms for daring to believe a black man from his neighborhood could wear a suit and stand in a courtroom. He had been doubted by professors, sneered at by colleagues, and underestimated by rivals. Every sneer, every smirk, every condescending remark had built the armor he wore now. He wasn't about to let 3 small men in uniform crack it. One evening, as he sat in his office surrounded by case files, Marcus leaned back in his chair and smiled to himself. Retaliation was reckless. Retaliation left trails, and trails, when followed correctly, led to justice. The plan formed slowly, carefully. He began by gathering statements from people in the neighborhood, not just the boy they harassed, but others too. Stories poured out, each one damning: unlawful stops, intimidation, false charges, planted evidence whispered about in hushed tones. Many had stayed silent out of fear, but Marcus had a way of making people feel safe enough to speak. His presence was calm, but his resolve was iron. Weeks turned into months, and Marcus built a case not in the courtroom, but in the shadows. He filed complaints, obtained internal reports, tracked disciplinary records. Every brick of abuse, every lie covered by paperwork, every name that had been silenced, he laid them all out in a puzzle that painted a clear picture of corruption. Then came the night everything changed. Marcus was leaving his office when headlights flared in the alley. A squad car blocked his path. The door slammed open, and Sergeant Cole stepped out, his grin dark under the glow of the streetlight. 2 other officers followed. "Evening, counselor. We need to have a little chat." Marcus set his briefcase down slowly. His voice was calm, but steel edged every syllable. "This is harassment. Step aside." Cole laughed, a low, ugly sound. "See, that's the problem with guys like you. You think you can hide behind big words and paperwork. But out here, law is what we say it is." The other officers closed in, hands resting on their belts. The tension crackled in the air, heavy and dangerous. Marcus didn't move, didn't blink. He let them think they had him cornered. "You made us look like fools," Cole continued, "in front of that kid, in front of the whole damn block. You think we're just gonna let that slide?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying him. "I don't think, I know. Because every word you say, every step you take right now is being recorded." Cole froze. His eyes darted, searching. Marcus tapped his wrist where a small, nearly invisible device blinked faintly. "Do you really think I didn't see this coming?" The younger officers hesitated, doubt flickering across their faces. Cole cursed under his breath. "You son of a—" "Careful," Marcus cut in. His tone sharpened, precise as a scalpel. "One more word, and the file goes live." The sergeant's grin faltered. "What file?" Marcus straightened. His presence filled the alley with a quiet authority that dwarfed their bravado. "The file with sworn statements from over a dozen residents. The file with your disciplinary reports. The file that proves tonight isn't the first time you've crossed the line and won't be the last unless someone stops you. That file is encrypted and set to send to the district attorney, the Civil Rights Division, and half the city council if anything happens to me." The silence was suffocating. Cole's bravado cracked, his breathing shallow. The younger officers shifted uneasily, their loyalty wobbling under the weight of Marcus's words. "You think you're untouchable?" Cole spat, but his voice lacked conviction now. "No, Marcus replied. His eyes bore into the sergeant's, unflinching. "I think you are, for now. But power built on fear doesn't last, and men who abuse it always fall, always." Cole's fists clenched, but he didn't move. Finally, with a growl, he shoved past Marcus and stormed back to the car. The others followed, silent shadows behind their broken leader. Tires screeched, and the cruiser vanished into the night. Marcus stood alone in the alley, the echoes of the confrontation fading. He bent down, picked up his briefcase, and walked on. His steps were steady, unshaken. Days later, the file went public, not because Marcus released it, but because the boy from that night, now braver than fear, had taken Marcus's words to heart. He shared his story, and others followed. The media swarmed, the department scrambled, and suddenly the same officers who once mocked and threatened were facing investigations, suspensions, and charges. Marcus never gloated. Revenge to him was not in shouting victory, but in watching justice do its work. He sat quietly in his office as headlines screamed of corruption exposed, as Cole's face appeared on screens not as a man of authority, but as a man disgraced. And when the boy came to thank him again, older now, stronger in spirit, Marcus only smiled. He said, "Remember, justice isn't about power, it's about truth. And truth always wins, even when it takes time." The boy nodded, his voice steady now. "I'll never forget." And Marcus leaned back, the weight of years and battles pressing against him, but his spirit unbroken. The war was never over, not in a world where arrogance disguised itself as authority. But for tonight, for this moment, he had proven once again that knowledge, courage, and truth outlast every abuse of power. Because power built on abuse never lasts. And Marcus Hale, lawyer, fighter, survivor, knew the law better than anyone.